Story number 1. The House That Watches. It started the night I moved in. The house belonged to my grandfather, a man I barely knew, who had lived in complete isolation for years before he passed. When the will named me as the sole inheritor, I had no choice but to accept. I was between jobs, drowning in bills, and the thought of free property. Even a creaky, snow-covered cabin in the middle of nowhere felt like a lifeline. But standing in front of it for the first time, watching the last streaks of daylight disappear behind the skeletal trees, I felt something I hadn't expected. The house was waiting for me. It was a simple 2-story cabin swallowed by the winter landscape. Thick snow blanketed the roof. The surrounding woods were eerily still, and the wind howled through the naked branches like a whisper carrying secrets. I pulled my coat tighter and trudged up the steps, my boots crunching in the ice. As I reached for the doorknob, I hesitated. The front door was unlocked. I was sure I had locked it. Brushing off the unease creeping up my spine, I stepped inside. The air smelled of dust and old wood, with a faint hint of something else, something stale, like damp fabric left untouched for too long. My grandfather's belongings were still here. An old armchair sat by the window, a thick layer of dust coating its fabric. The fireplace was cold and lifeless. The floorboards groaned beneath my weight as I walked through the living room, flicking on the dim overhead light. The place was exactly as I had expected, and yet I felt watched. I shook it off as nerves. I was alone, in a house that hadn't been lived in for years, in the dead of winter. Of course, I was uneasy. I spent the first few hours unpacking, forcing myself to ignore the unsettling silence. Outside, the wind had picked up, sending sharp gusts of snow against the windows. The temperature was dropping fast. As night settled in, I finally allowed myself to sit. I had dragged a chair to the window, staring out into the snowy woods. The landscape was a frozen wasteland, the kind of silence that swallowed sound. No animals, no movement, just white stretching into the black of the trees. Then I saw them, faint imprints in the snow, just beyond the tree line. Footprints. My chest tightened. The tracks were fresh, not yet softened by the wind. They led toward the house, but there were no prints leading away. I peered into the darkness, searching for movement, but the woods remained still. My breath fogged against the glass. Every instinct screamed at me to lock the doors, but some irrational part of me whispered, "It's too late for that." I pulled the curtains shut. That night, sleep did not come easily. The cabin creaked and sighed with the wind. But beneath those natural sounds, I thought I heard something else. The soft rustling of fabric, the floorboards groaning ever so slightly, as if someone was shifting their weight. I lay frozen, my heart pounding against my ribs, listening. And then the feeling returned, that unbearable sensation of being watched. I turned onto my side, facing the bedroom door. It was open. I had closed it before getting into bed. My stomach knotted. The hallway beyond was pitch black, an endless void of darkness stretching toward the stairway. I told myself the draft had pushed it open, that I was being ridiculous, but as I stared, unmoving, I became certain of one thing. Someone was standing just beyond the threshold. I couldn't see them, couldn't hear them, but I felt them. My fingers curled around the blanket, my breath shallow. I wanted to move, to get up and turn on the light, but some deep primal fear kept me frozen in place. Minutes passed, maybe hours. Eventually, exhaustion won. The next morning I convinced myself it had been a trick of the mind. I was adjusting to a new environment. Nothing more. The footprints outside had probably been there before I arrived. I forced myself into a routine, lighting a fire, making coffee, walking around the property. It helped a little, but then I found something I couldn't explain. On the back porch, pressed into the frost-covered wood, was a handprint. A single, bare handprint. I swallowed hard. My own hands were gloved, and I hadn't stepped outside without them. The print was large, the fingers long and splayed, as if someone had pressed their palm deliberately into the ice. The edges were still sharp, fresh. I wasn't alone. That night I didn't sleep. I sat by the fire, the shotgun my grandfather had left behind, resting across my lap. Every noise sent my nerves on edge. The feeling of being watched was worse now, pressing against me with a suffocating weight. And then, at exactly 3:12 a.m., the house sighed, not the usual creaks of old wood. Number, this was different. It was a sound of release, like an exhale, and then the doorknob rattled. My stomach dropped. The front door was locked. I was sure of it this time. The rattling was gentle at first, then more insistent, like someone testing the strength of the lock. My grip tightened around the shotgun. My breath caught in my throat. A long, agonizing moment passed. Then the knocking started. Soft, deliberate, 4 slow knocks. Then silence. I couldn't breathe. I didn't move. The air in the room felt wrong, heavy with something unseen. My hands trembled around the gun. Another knock. And then, footsteps. Not from outside. From inside the house. The creak of a floorboard near the stairs. A slow, dragging step. My body went rigid. I lifted the shotgun, aiming toward the dark hallway. The fire cast flickering shadows across the walls, distorting shapes that weren't there. But then, I saw them. Eyes. Staring from the darkness of the stairwell. Too wide. Too bright. Unblinking. I fired. The blast echoed through the cabin, shaking the walls. Smoke filled the air, the scent of gunpowder thick and suffocating. My ears rang, but I heard it, the sound of retreating footsteps. Heavy. Wrong. Like something crawling instead of walking. And then, silence. I didn't sleep. Didn't move until daylight bled through the windows. The house was empty. The only sign that anything had happened was the smoking hole in the stairwell. And yet, I knew it wasn't over. I left that morning, packed whatever I could carry, and never looked back. But sometimes, in the dead of winter, when the wind howls just right, I swear I hear it. The house, breathing, watching, waiting. Story number 2. The room that wasn't there. The blizzard hit harder than I expected. I was driving through the back roads trying to make it home before the storm got worse, but the snow was relentless, swallowing the road until I could barely see past my windshield. The GPS had lost signal miles ago, and I knew I was running out of gas. That's when I saw it. A house, barely visible through the heavy snowfall. It stood alone, tall and dark against the white landscape. There were no other houses around, no signs of life. Just that single, looming structure. I had no other choice. The temperature was plummeting, and staying in my car wasn't an option. I pulled up to the driveway, tires crunching over the ice, and stepped out into the frozen wind. The house was old, Victorian style, with peeling paint and frost-covered windows. There were no lights on, but something about it felt lived in, like it wasn't as abandoned as it appeared. The front door opened when I knocked. Not a slow creaking swing, just a quiet, deliberate click, like someone had unlocked it from the inside. I hesitated. Every instinct told me to turn back, but the wind was howling. My fingers were already going numb, and the warmth inside was too tempting. I stepped across the threshold. The air inside was stale, heavy with dust, and something else, something off, the kind of scent that makes your stomach turn, though you can't explain why. And the house was eerily silent aside from the distant sound of the wind pressing against the walls. Furniture sat untouched, as if waiting for someone to return. The wallpaper was peeling in places, revealing old, rotting wood underneath. But what struck me most was the cold. Despite the warmth from the fireplace in the center of the room, the house was just as cold inside as it was outside. I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. No response. I should have left. Instead, I wandered deeper inside, boots echoing against the wooden floor. My breath fogged in the air as I explored. There was a kitchen, a long hallway, a staircase, leading to the second floor. And then I saw it. A door. It was at the end of the hallway, slightly ajar. Something about it made my skin crawl. The wood was darker than the rest of the house, and unlike the other doors, this one had no dust on it. Like it was used. Fresh. I stepped closer, my pulse hammering in my throat. Something was wrong. With a shaking hand, I reached out and pushed it open. The room was empty. No furniture, no windows, just walls that felt too tight, too close. The air was heavier here, thick like molasses, pressing against my chest. The longer I stood there, the more it felt like the walls were closing in, like I wasn't supposed to be here. That's when I noticed something that made my blood turn to ice. The doorway I had just stepped through was gone. I spun around, heart slamming against my ribs. The door I had entered through wasn't there anymore, just an unbroken wall where it had been. My breath came in shallow gasps as I stumbled backward, pressing my palms against the cold, solid wood. There had been a door. I had just walked through it, and now I was trapped. The air grew colder. The walls seemed to pulse like a living thing, inhaling and exhaling. My breath came in ragged bursts as I pounded against the wall, my hands trembling. No response, no sound, and then a whisper. It came from behind me, slow, drawn out. A voice that wasn't mine, speaking words I couldn't understand. The hair on my arms rose as the whisper turned into a hum, something rhythmic, almost like a chant. My legs locked in place. I didn't want to turn around, but I had to. I turned my head, inch by inch. There was nothing there, just an empty room, stretching too far back now, longer than before. The walls were shifting, stretching, moving. The whispering grew louder, surrounding me, pressing into my skull like fingers digging into flesh. My vision blurred, my hands tingled. Then the walls shuddered, and I was somewhere else. The room was no longer empty. Furniture had appeared. An old wooden chair in the center, a dresser against the far wall, a mirror covered in dust. But the worst part? The door was back, and it was open. I didn't think. I ran. Bursting through the doorway, I found myself back in the hallway. The house was different now. The air was thicker, heavier, like the walls had been holding their breath and finally exhaled. The furniture in the living room had shifted, as if someone had moved it while I was gone. The fire in the fireplace was out, leaving only blackened logs and the lingering scent of smoke. And then something clicked upstairs, a slow, deliberate sound, a door unlocking. I stared at the staircase, my body frozen in place. Something was up there, something that knew I had found the room. I didn't wait. I bolted for the front door, yanking it open. The storm had eased, just enough for me to see my car still parked outside. Without looking back, I sprinted through the snow, my breath coming in sharp gasps. I didn't stop until I was inside the car, the engine roaring to life under my shaking hands. I looked back at the house one last time, and that's when I saw it. A figure in the upstairs window, standing perfectly still, watching me. Its face was hidden in shadow, but I knew it wasn't human. I hit the gas and didn't stop driving until I reached the main road. Days later, I tried to find that house again. I checked maps, searched online, even drove back down that road. But the house was gone. No foundation, no driveway, just endless, empty snow, like it had never existed, like it had moved, waiting for someone else to find it. Story number 3, the frozen caller. The phone rang at exactly 2:17 a.m. I sat up so fast my head spun. The room was dark, the only light coming from the dying embers in the fireplace. My breath hung in the air like fog, the cold creeping under my blankets. I wasn't supposed to hear that sound. The landline hadn't worked in years. My grandmother's house was deep in the countryside, miles away from the nearest town. After she passed, no one had lived here. But I needed an escape, a place to clear my mind. And I thought a week alone in the old house would be peaceful. Instead, I was sitting in the middle of the night, staring at a phone that should not be ringing. It was one of those old rotary phones, heavy and black, sitting on a wooden side table near the couch. My grandmother used to answer it every time with the same calm voice, no matter who was calling, but she was gone. No one knew I was here. The phone kept ringing. I swallowed, my throat dry, and forced myself to move. Each step toward the phone felt heavier, like something was pushing against me. My fingers hovered over the receiver. The air smelled different now, colder, like snow had seeped into the house. I answered. At first there was only silence, then a soft crackling like the sound of ice shifting on a frozen lake, a slow inhale, and then my name. A whisper, so faint, so close, like someone was speaking right into my ear. I dropped the phone. The receiver dangled, swinging slightly, the cord twisting in slow, deliberate spirals. The whispering didn't stop. It grew, layers of voices speaking over each other, blending together in a thick, suffocating hum. My pulse pounded in my ears, and then beneath it all, a laugh. Not loud, not forced, just a small, breathy sound. The kind of laugh you might hear if someone was standing in the corner of the room, watching you. I slammed the receiver down. The house fell into silence. My breath came in ragged bursts, my hands shaking. I turned back toward the couch, willing my body to relax. Maybe it was static, a wrong number. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. And then, from the hallway, the phone rang again. I spun so fast I nearly tripped. The phone sat on the table, perfectly still. The ringing wasn't coming from there, it was coming from down the hall. There was another phone. My grandmother's bedroom. I had forgotten. The hallway stretched before me, the darkness thicker there, swallowing the edges of the old wallpaper. I told myself not to go. I should leave, but my feet moved forward, slow and unsteady, drawn toward the sound. The ringing was muffled now, like it was coming from behind something. I reached the bedroom door. It was slightly open, just enough to see inside. The room was exactly how she had left it, neat, untouched, frozen in time. The curtains were drawn back, revealing the window. Outside, the snow was still falling in thick sheets, covering the ground in an endless, white void. The phone sat on the nightstand, off the hook. It was ringing. I stepped inside, the floor creaking beneath me. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of dust and something older, something damp. The ringing grew louder, sharper, until it was all I could hear. And then, as I reached for it, it stopped. Silence pressed against my ears. My fingers hovered over the receiver, the old black plastic cold as ice. And then I saw it, the window. The glass was covered in frost except for one spot, a handprint. Large, spread fingers. The ice melted away in perfect detail, as if someone had pressed their bare palm against it from the outside. My stomach twisted. The footprints were worse. Leading up to the window deep in the snow were prints. Bare feet. The tracks started at the tree line and ended right beneath the glass. But there were no footprints leading away. I stumbled back, nearly knocking over the nightstand. My skin prickled, the cold digging into my bones. I turned toward the door. The phone rang again, but not from the nightstand. From inside the closet. My breath hitched. The closet door was slightly open, revealing a sliver of blackness. The ringing was softer now, like the sound was being swallowed by the dark. My grandmother never kept a phone in there. The air shifted. I wasn't alone. Something moved inside. A slow, dragging sound, like fabric brushing against wood. My pulse hammered in my ears. I wanted to run. My body screamed at me to run. And then, just as suddenly as it started, the ringing stopped. Silence. And then, a whisper. Not from the closet, not from the phone, from behind me. I turned, heart slamming against my ribs. The window was still covered in frost, the handprint still visible. But now, there was a face, faint, barely visible, pressed against the ice. Mouth open, watching. I ran. I didn't stop. Not when I slammed the bedroom door shut behind me. Not when the phone in the living room started ringing again. Not when I grabbed my coat and stumbled into the freezing night. The snow swallowed my footsteps as I sprinted to my car, barely managing to yank the door open. I looked back only once. The house stood silent, dark against the storm. The bedroom window covered in frost. And the handprint? It was gone. I left that night and never went back. The house still belongs to my family, but I'll never step foot inside again. Because sometimes, in the dead of winter, when the wind howls through the trees, I still hear it. The phone ringing. And I know it's not for me. Story number 4. The forgotten tenant. I didn't want the house. It came to me in a will from a distant uncle I had never met, a man no one in my family really talked about. The paperwork arrived in the dead of winter, along with a single yellowed letter. Short, barely a few sentences, written in shaky handwriting. Never stay past midnight, and whatever you do, don't go in the attic. That should have been enough for me to walk away, but I was broke, out of options, and a free house. Even a decaying one in the middle of nowhere was too good to ignore. So I packed my things and drove through the snow-covered roads until I reached it. The house was old, not just in the way houses get old, but in the way that made it feel wrong, like time had settled into its bones and never left. The roof sagged under the weight of years of neglect. The windows were fogged from the cold, barely letting in the gray afternoon light. Inside, the air was thick with dust and something else, something stale. It felt lived in, but not by someone who wanted to be there. I spent the first day cleaning, pushing aside furniture that had been untouched for decades. It was almost peaceful in a lonely, forgotten sort of way. But as the sun dipped below the horizon and the house settled into darkness, That peace disappeared. It started with footsteps, faint at first, just the creak of old wood, shifting under the weight of something unseen. I told myself it was the wind, that the cold was making the house groan. But then, as I lay in bed, listening, I realized something chilling. The sounds were inside the house. Slow, careful footsteps, moving, just beyond my bedroom door. I didn't move. I barely breathed. My mind fought against the fear rising in my chest. The house was supposed to be empty. The footsteps stopped. Then, a whisper. So soft, so close, like it was being spoken just outside the door. I bolted upright, heart pounding, listening for anything. Movement. Another whisper. A sign that I wasn't alone. But there was nothing. Just silence. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning I told myself I had imagined it. I was in an unfamiliar place, my mind playing tricks on me. But then, as I made my way downstairs, something caught my eye. A chair had been moved, just slightly, just enough to notice. And on the floor, leading toward the attic door, were footprints in the dust, bare feet. I stopped breathing. My own footprints were scattered around, clumsy, hurried, but these were different. They were too perfect, too deliberate. They led right up to the attic, but not back down. A deep chill settled into my bones. I stood there, staring at that door, feeling something shift in the air around me. The house was silent, but it felt occupied. I told myself I wouldn't touch the attic, that I would do what the letter said and stay away. But as the day dragged on and the sky grew dark again, an unease settled into my chest. I wasn't alone. That night, the footsteps came back. Not slow, this time. Not careful. They were running, pounding against the floorboards above me, shaking the ceiling, rattling the light fixtures. And then, a knock on my bedroom door. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My fingers clenched the blankets, my body frozen in place. The knocking was soft at first, then more insistent, and then a voice. Not loud, not a whisper, just wrong. Let me in. I scrambled out of bed, pressing myself against the far wall, my chest heaving. The door never opened. The voice never came again. But the knocking? It didn't stop. For hours, I sat in the dark, listening to that slow, deliberate tapping, until, just as the first light of morning crept through the window, it stopped. I left my room as soon as the sun rose, my body stiff with exhaustion. The house was eerily still, like it had been waiting for me to wake up. And then I saw the note. It hadn't been there before. It was on the kitchen table, written in the same shaky handwriting as the letter I had received. You should have left last night. You shouldn't have stayed past midnight. My blood ran cold. The ink was still wet. I didn't pack. I didn't grab my things. I just ran. I don't know who or what lives in that house, but I know this. It never forgot me, and I know it's waiting. Story number 5. The Man in the Ice. The first time I saw him, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. The lake had frozen over weeks ago, a thick sheet of ice stretching across the land like a mirror. It was deep winter, the kind that numbed your fingers the moment you stepped outside. I had come to my family's old cabin for some solitude, a break from the noise of my life. The cabin sat near the edge of the lake, surrounded by endless white. No neighbors, no roads, just the sound of the wind howling through the trees. I woke up early that morning, stepping onto the porch with a steaming mug in my hands. The sky was heavy with clouds, threatening more snow. My breath curled in the air as I gazed at the frozen lake. And then I saw it. A face, not a reflection. A face beneath the ice. I nearly dropped my mug. At first, I thought it was just the way the ice had formed, cracks creating the illusion of features. But no. The more I stared, the clearer it became. A man's face, frozen, eyes wide open, mouth slightly parted, as if he had been screaming when the lake swallowed him. I stumbled forward, my boots crunching over the snow, stopping just at the edge of the ice. My stomach twisted. He looked fresh, his features too clear, too intact to have been trapped for long. But that didn't make sense. The lake had been frozen solid for over a month. No one could have fallen in recently. I told myself to call to the authorities, to go back inside, use the satellite phone, and report what I'd seen. But I didn't move. I couldn't. Because then, his eyes moved. Not much, just the tiniest shift, like they were rolling toward me beneath the ice. A shadow of motion. So slight, I almost convinced myself I had imagined it. Almost. The wind picked up, a sharp gust that bit at my exposed skin, snapping me out of my trance. I took a step back, my heartbeat hammering in my ears. Something about the air had changed. It felt thicker, charged with something unseen. I turned on my heel and hurried back inside, bolting the door behind me. But I didn't stop thinking about the man in the ice. That night, the wind wailed against the cabin, rattling the windows. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, pale and distorted beneath the ice. A part of me wondered if I had really seen him move, if my mind had twisted the image into something it wasn't. And then just past midnight, I heard it. A sound that didn't belong. Knocking. Soft at first, then more insistent. A steady, deliberate pattern. I bolted upright, my breath catching in my throat. The knocking wasn't coming from the front door, it was coming from the floor, from beneath the cabin. I swallowed hard, my body frozen in place. The sound was faint but unmistakable, a slow, rhythmic tapping against the wooden planks, as if someone was underneath. My mind raced. The cabin sat on a foundation of stone and frozen earth. There was no space beneath it, and yet the knocking continued. I forced myself to move, creeping toward the floorboards with slow, careful steps. The sound stopped the moment I got close. The silence pressed against me, thick and suffocating. My breath came in shallow gasps as I crouched down, pressing my ear to the wood. Nothing. Just when I started to think I had imagined it, something dragged across the wood beneath me. A slow, deliberate scrape, like nails or fingers, dragging along the underside of the floor. I scrambled backward, my pulse thundering in my ears. The cabin suddenly felt smaller, the air wrong, heavy with something unseen. I fumbled for my boots, my coat, ready to leave. I didn't care how late it was or how deep the snow had gotten, but then a whisper, not in my head, not in the wind, from the lake. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. Through the frosted window, the ice stretched out, gleaming in the moonlight. And in the center of the lake, he was standing there. The man in the ice, only he wasn't under it anymore. My breath hitched. He stood on the frozen surface, his figure impossibly still. His clothes were soaked, clinging to his body, though there had been no holes in the ice, no way for him to have gotten out. His skin was deathly pale, his lips tinged blue, and he was looking directly at me. I backed away from the window, my hands shaking. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. The knocking started again, louder this time, angrier. The whole cabin shook, the walls groaning as if Something immense was pressing against them. The lights flickered. The fire in the hearth died instantly, plunging the room into cold darkness. And then the doorknob turned. Slowly, I stumbled backward, my back hitting the wall. The door didn't open. It just shuddered, as if something was pressing against it from the outside. And then his voice, a whisper, hollow, not quite human. "Let me in." I covered my ears, squeezing my eyes shut. I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to see it. The temperature plummeted, the cold pressing into my bones. My breaths came in ragged bursts, and I could feel him there, just beyond the door, waiting. Somewhere in the distance, I heard a crack, the sound of splitting ice, a deep, echoing groan as something heavy shifted. And then, silence. I stayed there, curled against the wall, until the first light of morning seeped through the windows. When I finally forced myself to move, my hands were numb, my body aching from the cold. The door was still locked. The fire was still out. And when I stepped outside, the lake was empty. The ice was smooth, untouched. There were no footprints, no cracks, no sign that anything had ever been there. But as I turned to leave, my breath hitched, because just at the edge of the ice, barely visible beneath the frozen surface, his face was there again. And this time, he was smiling. Story number 8. The footsteps that didn't melt. I first noticed the footsteps in the morning, just as the sun peeked over the treetops, casting long shadows across the snow-covered yard. I had been staying at my late grandfather's cabin for a few weeks, isolated, deep in the mountains, where the snow piled thick and untouched. The nearest neighbor was miles away, and the only sounds at night were the wind howling through the trees and the occasional groan of the wooden beams setting in the cold. That morning, as I stepped outside onto the porch, something caught my eye. Footprints. They started from the tree line and led directly to my front door. I frowned. There hadn't been any visitors. The storm last night had left a fresh layer of snow, untouched, except for my own tracks from the day before. But these weren't mine. I bent down, inspecting them closely. Bare feet, large, too large for a child, too misshapen for a normal person. The prints pressed deep into the snow. Like whatever made them had been heavy. My stomach twisted. The tracks stopped at my door, but there were none leading away. A sharp gust of wind sent a chill down my spine. But it wasn't the cold that made me shudder. It was the feeling creeping up the back of my neck, the unsettling certainty that I wasn't alone. I turned slowly, scanning the tree line, the white-covered ground stretching endlessly into the woods. Nothing moved. No sounds, no birds, just the distant rustling of branches. I stepped back inside, bolting the door behind me. I tried to push it out of my mind. Maybe it was a trick of the snow, some shifting ice that left strange impressions. Maybe I had been half asleep when I saw them, imagining things, but when I looked out the window an hour later, the prints were still there, and they hadn't melted. That was the moment I knew something was wrong. The sun had been up for hours, bright against the snow. My own tracks from yesterday were already fading, softening at the edges. But these, they remained sharp, perfectly defined, untouched by time or warmth. I grabbed my coat and stepped outside again, heart hammering. The air was bitterly cold, the silence even heavier than before. I crouched beside the prints, reaching out hesitantly. The snow inside them wasn't melting. It wasn't even soft. It was solid ice. A slow, sick feeling coiled in my stomach. I straightened, suddenly aware of how quiet it was. How still the world had become. The wind had died. The trees stood frozen, brittle and unmoving. Even my breath misting in the air felt too loud. I turned back toward the door and froze. The rest of the night I sat downstairs wide-eyed, every light in the house on. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was an echo, a trick of sound. Maybe the vents connected to a crawl space I didn't know about. But deep down, I knew the truth. Something was in the walls. The next morning I tried to find the vents opening outside. I bundled up, stepping onto the porch where the snow had piled waist-high. My boots crunched through the ice as I circled the house, searching. There was no external vent, no openings, no way for anyone to be inside the walls. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I made a decision. I had to check the vent. I grabbed a flashlight and a screwdriver, forcing myself to kneel before the grate. My breath was unsteady as I loosened the rusted screws, the metal groaning as I pried it loose. A rush of cold air hit my face, thick with dust and something else, something stale. I held the flashlight up, peering into the darkness beyond. A tunnel stretched deep inside the wall, narrower than I expected, leading into pitch-black nothingness. The air felt different inside, wrong, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. Then I saw them. Fingernail marks, deep scratches carved into the metal lining of the vent, as if someone, or something, had tried to claw their way out. A chill ran down my spine. I jerked back, gripping the flashlight tighter. The light flickered. Then, from deep inside the tunnel, the whisper returned. "You shouldn't have opened it." A breathless voice, too close. The flashlight died. Panic seized me. I scrambled backward, my breath coming in sharp gasps. I fumbled for the grate, my hand shaking as I shoved it back into place. The screwdriver slipped from my grip, clattering against the floor. And then, something knocked from inside the vent. 3 sharp taps. I ran. I spent the night in my car, refusing to step back inside the house. The blizzard raged on, the wind howling through the trees, but I didn't care. I kept my headlights on, gripping the steering wheel with white-knuckled hands. By the time morning came, I had made my decision. I packed whatever I could fit into a bag and left. I didn't care about the rest. I never went back. A few weeks later, I got a call from my uncle. He had returned to the house and found everything as I had left it, except for one thing. The vent in my room had been ripped open from the inside. He laughed, saying it must have been an animal, but I could hear it in his voice. He didn't believe that. Neither did I. Even now, I still hear it sometimes. A whisper through vents that shouldn't carry sound. A voice calling my name. And the words, "I pray I never hear again." I found you. Story number 7. The stranger in the reflection. I should have never looked into the mirror. The snowstorm came fast, trapping me in the old hotel before I could make it back to the city. It wasn't the kind of place I would have chosen. Too empty, too forgotten. The kind of hotel that had been grand once, decades ago, but now sat in eerie silence with its faded carpets and dimly lit hallways. The receptionist was a hunched old man who barely spoke as he handed me the key. "No one else here tonight?" he muttered. "Storm's bad. Stay in your room." I climbed the winding staircase to the second floor, the air stale and heavy with the scent of aged wood. My room was at the end of the hall, small, cold, with a single bed and an old vanity mirror bolted to the wall opposite it. I turned the mirror to face away. I never liked mirrors at night. Something about them always felt wrong, like they held on to more than just reflections. The storm howled outside, rattling through the windows as I settled into bed. The heater in the corner barely worked, letting out weak, groaning puffs of warmth. I pulled the blankets tight around me, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling curling in my chest. Then, sometime past midnight, I heard it, a soft tap. I froze, eyes open in the dark. The sound was faint, almost hesitant. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from across the room. I sat up slowly, my breath misting in the freezing air, my stomach twisted. The mirror. I had turned it away. I was sure I had turned it away, but now it was facing me again. I swallowed hard. The dim light from the street lamps outside cast faint shadows, barely enough to make out my reflection in the glass. But something was off. I wasn't sitting up. My reflection still lay in bed. A cold wave of fear washed over me. I blinked hard, my mind scrambling for an explanation. A trick of the light. My tired eyes playing games. But no, the figure in the mirror lay still, eyes closed, arms resting at its sides. It wasn't me. Then slowly, its lips curved into a smile. I shoved myself backward, my pulse hammering in my ears. My breath hitched, my chest tight with terror. The figure in the mirror didn't move except for that smile, stretching wider, teeth glinting in the dim light. And then it opened its eyes. My stomach lurched. They weren't my eyes, they were darker, emptier, gleaming with something I couldn't understand. The figure in the mirror lifted a hand, but I didn't move. It was watching me, studying me. The air in the room felt heavier, pressing against my skin like unseen hands. My limbs locked in place, paralyzed by something far colder than the winter storm outside. Then the lights flickered just once, a single shuddering pulse of light, and when the darkness settled again, the figure in the mirror was sitting up. I couldn't breathe. It tilted its head, just slightly, like it was mimicking me. The smile never faded. My own reflection, staring back at me with something that wasn't me inside it. Then, without warning, it stood up. I bolted from the bed, my heart clawing at my ribs. The mirror rattled against the wall, the glass fogging slightly as if something breathed against the other side. I stumbled toward the door, fingers fumbling against the cold brass handle. It wouldn't move. A whisper curled through the room. Software wrong. Let me out. The words slithered across my skin like ice water. I pressed myself against the door, my body trembling. The mirror shuddered, the glass rippling like disturbed water. I forced my eyes shut. This isn't real. This isn't real. The whisper came again, closer this time. I've been waiting. A sharp crack split the air. I turned just in time to see the mirror fracture, a jagged web of cracks splintering from the center. But the figure inside, it didn't move. It just stood there smiling as if it had expected this. And then, as I stared, the cracks in the glass bled. Thick, inky liquid seeped from the fractures, trailing down the surface like veins. The room grew colder, the air buzzing with something unseen, something ancient. I banged against the door, desperation clawing at my throat. The mirror shook violently now, the frame rattling as if something on the other side was trying to break through. Then the whispering stopped. A pause, a breath, and then the light went out. I don't remember what happened next. I don't remember how I got out of that room. The next thing I knew, I was outside in the snow, the storm blinding, my body numb with cold. I don't remember running. I don't remember opening the door. The hotel was gone, just an empty lot, no walls, no rooms, no mirrors. I never told anyone, but sometimes late at night when I pass by mirrors in dark rooms, I swear I see it. A reflection that isn't mine. Still waiting? Still smiling. Story number 6. The voice in the vent. The first time I heard it, I thought it was just the wind. The house was old, built long before central heating, and the vents that ran through the walls were relics of an earlier time. Narrow iron grates lined the baseboards, leading into unseen tunnels that carried warmth through the rooms. It was my first night alone, snowed in by the worst blizzard of the season, the wind screaming outside like a living thing. I was halfway through a book when I heard it. A whisper, faint, almost distant, coming from the vent near the floor. At first I dismissed it, convincing myself it was just the way air moved through the ducts. But as I sat there, straining to listen over the crackling of the fireplace, I realized it wasn't the wind. It was a voice, software breathing, like someone was just behind the grate, whispering my name. I froze, my skin prickling with cold that had nothing to do with the temperature. The sound was barely there, so quiet I almost doubted I heard it at all. But then it came again, a slow exhale, and then the words, "Can you hear me?" I slammed the book shut. The room suddenly felt too small, the firelight casting uneasy shadows on the walls. I stared at the vent, waiting, but the whispering stopped. I told myself it was nothing, that I was overtired, my mind playing tricks on me. The vents were old. Maybe they carried sounds from outside. And that night, I barely slept. The second time, there was no mistaking it. I had just settled into bed when I heard it again. The same whisper, curling through the air vent near the dresser. Only this time, it was closer. "Are you awake?" My blood ran cold. I gripped the blanket, every muscle in my body locking in place. The house was still, the only sound the distant wail of the storm outside. The whisper came again, clearer now, the words deliberate. "I know you can hear me." My breath hitched. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. I hadn't told anyone I was here. The roads were impassable. There was no one else in the house, and yet I wasn't alone. I reached for my phone, my fingers shaking as I turned on the flashlight. The vent was only a few feet away, the metal grate old and rusted. Slowly, cautiously, I slid out of bed and crouched beside it. I hesitated, then forced myself to speak. "Who's there?" Silence. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. I exhaled, shaking my head. Maybe it really was just the wind. Then, directly behind the vent, something moved. A shift in the darkness. A soft, scraping sound, as if fingers were dragging across metal. I stumbled backward, my pulse hammering in my ears. And then, it spoke again. "Let me out." I bolted for the door. There was another set of footprints now, leading from the opposite side of the house. My pulse pounded in my ears. These were the same, bare feet, too large, too deep, and they led straight toward me. But I hadn't heard anything. I hadn't seen anything. I spun around, scanning the trees, the empty porch, the vast white silence surrounding me. Nothing. I backed up slowly, my boots crunching in the snow, my breath coming in fast, shaky bursts. I didn't take my eyes off the footprints as I reached the door. My fingers fumbled with the handle, the cold biting into my skin. I slipped inside and slammed it shut. I locked every bolt, every latch. The cabin wasn't much, just a few rooms. But at that moment, it felt like the only barrier between me and whatever was out there. I didn't go outside again that day. I barely moved from the chair by the fireplace, listening, but the footsteps didn't stop. Just after sunset, I heard them. Not in the snow, this time. On the porch. A slow, deliberate creak of wood. I clutched the poker from the fireplace, my knuckles white. Another step, then another. The sound was too heavy, too deep, as if something enormous was pressing down on the boards. I forced myself to stand. I didn't want to, but some primal instinct told me I had to see. I stepped toward the window, heart slamming against my ribs. The dim light from the fire flickered against the glass. And then, in the reflection, I saw it. A shape, tall, towering, standing at the porch railing, too thin, too elongated, with arms that hung too low. The breath left my lungs in a sharp gasp. My stomach lurched as I spun around. The porch was empty. Nothing. No movement. No sound. Just the long, untouched stretch of white beyond the cabin. But when I looked down, the footprints had moved. They were right up against the door now. And still, they hadn't melted. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the chair by the fireplace, gripping the poker, staring at the door. Hours passed in tense silence, the fire slowly dying to embers. Then, at exactly 3:12 a.m., I heard it. A whisper. From inside the cabin. Close. Too close. Right behind me. I spun, swinging the poker wildly, my breath coming in ragged gasps. But the room was empty. The only sound was my own breathing. And then, as I stood there, shaking, I felt it. A chill against my back. A presence. Something standing just behind me. I turned slowly, my hands trembling. There was nothing. But in the glow of the dying fire, I saw them. Footprints. Inside the house. Leading straight to where I stood. I ran. I didn't pack. I didn't turn off the lights. I just grabbed my keys and fled into the night, my boots crunching against the frozen ground. The footprints followed me, not in the snow, on the wooden floorboards behind me. I didn't stop, not until I reached my truck, not until I threw it into gear and sped down the icy road, the tires slipping, the trees blurring past. When I finally dared to look in the rearview mirror, the cabin was a shadow in the distance, barely visible through the falling snow. But I saw something else, standing just beyond the porch, still watching. I never went back. I never spoke about it. But sometimes, in the dead of winter, when the snow is thick and the air is still, I look outside and see them. Footprints leading to my door. And they still haven't melted. Just once. A single, shuddering pulse of light. And when the darkness settled again, the figure in the mirror was sitting up. I couldn't breathe. It tilted its head, just slightly, like it was mimicking me. The smile never faded. My own reflection, staring back at me with something that wasn't me inside it. Then, without warning, it stood up. I bolted from the bed, my heart clawing at my ribs. The mirror rattled against the wall, the glass fogging slightly as if something breathed against the other side. I stumbled toward the door, fingers fumbling against the cold brass handle. It wouldn't move. A whisper curled through the room. Software wrong. Let me out. The words slithered across my skin like ice water. I pressed myself against the door, my body trembling. The mirror shuddered, the glass rippling like disturbed water. I forced my eyes shut. This isn't real. This isn't real. The whisper came again, closer this time. I've been waiting. A sharp crack split the air. I turned just in time to see the mirror fracture, a jagged web of cracks splintering from the center. But the figure inside, it didn't move. It just stood there smiling as if it had expected this. And then, as I stared, the cracks in the glass bled. Thick, inky liquid seeped from the fractures, trailing down the surface like veins. The room grew colder, the air buzzing with something unseen, something ancient. I banged against the door, desperation clawing at my throat. The mirror shook violently now, the frame rattling as if something on the other side was trying to break through. Then the whispering stopped. A pause, a breath, and then the light went out. I don't remember what happened next. I don't remember how I got out of that room. The next thing I knew, I was outside in the snow, the storm blinding, my body numb with cold. I don't remember running. I don't remember opening the door. The hotel was gone, just an empty lot, no walls, no rooms, no mirrors. I never told anyone, but sometimes late at night when I pass by mirrors in dark rooms, I swear I see it. A reflection that isn't mine. Still waiting? Still smiling. The furniture had moved, not much, just slightly. A chair that had been facing the fireplace was now turned toward the hallway. The table in the corner was off-center, as if someone had nudged it in the night. Ryan laughed it off, said we were paranoid. Josh agreed, but then the fireplace went out. Not slowly. Not like the fire had burned out on its own. It was snuffed out like something had swallowed the flames in an instant. The temperature in the room dropped so fast that I saw my breath. And then came the breathing again. Louder. Closer. Ryan moved toward the fireplace, muttering about a draft. But before he could touch it, the logs rolled out onto the floor. We all froze. The house exhaled again, long and hollow. That was when Josh saw the footprints. They led from the fireplace, across the floor, and disappeared into the hallway. Bare feet, too large, too deep in the dust to have been ours. I grabbed my coat. "We need to leave." Ryan scoffed. "Come on, man. It's just..." The house inhaled. The walls shifted. It wasn't a trick of the light. It wasn't our imaginations. The walls contracted, pressing inward like lungs filling with air. The windows groaned. The floor beneath us shuddered. And then, from upstairs, a footstep, not ours, slow, deliberate, followed by another and another, coming down the stairs. Sarah whimpered, backing into the corner. My fingers dug into my coat, my body screaming at me to run. But Ryan, stubborn, stupid Ryan, grabbed a flashlight and stepped toward the hall. "Hello?" The breathing stopped. Silence stretched, thick and heavy. Then a whisper, low, wrong. Not a voice, not really. Just a sound curling through the air like something pressing against the walls, seeping into the wood. Then, from the hallway, a shadow moved. It was fast, too fast to be human. A blur, a shape that wasn't there before, shifting in the dim light. The air plunged into ice-cold silence. The only sound was the pounding of my heartbeat. Then, behind me, Sarah screamed. I spun just in time to see her stumble backward, eyes wide, lips trembling. She was staring at the wall. I followed her gaze and my stomach dropped. The wallpaper had shifted. No, not shifted. Peeled back, revealing something underneath. Flesh, not rotting wood, not bricks. Skin. The house breathed again, slow and deep, and the walls pulsed. Ryan cursed, dropping the flashlight. It rolled across the floor, casting long, twisted shadows. Josh backed toward the door, hands shaking. Then the whisper came again. "Stay." The lights flickered, the ceiling bulged like something inside was pressing outward, stretching against the wooden beams. A low, guttural groan rattled through the house. We ran. We didn't grab our bags. We didn't look back. The front door flung open. As we reached it, the wind outside screaming through the trees. Snow blinded us as we stumbled out into the storm. But before I stepped off the porch, I made the mistake of glancing back. And in the doorway, it stood there. Not a person, not a shadow. The house itself stretched into something wrong, something not meant to be seen. A gaping mouth where the door should have been. The walls trembling like living flesh. And inside, deep in the darkness, I saw them. Faces, eyes staring from within the walls, mouths open in silent screams. The house exhaled one last time, and the door slammed shut. We never spoke about what happened. We never went back. But sometimes, in the dead of winter, when the wind howls through the trees, I swear I hear it. The sound of a house breathing. Story number 10. The letter under the snow. The letter shouldn't have been there. I had been shoveling snow off the front porch of my late aunt's house, clearing the steps after the storm. The wind was bitter, cutting through my coat as I pushed the heavy snow aside. The house had been abandoned for years, left to rot after she passed. No one had lived here since. But as I dug through the thick layer of ice, something appeared beneath the snow. At first, I thought it was just a scrap of paper blown in by the wind. But as I pulled it free, brushing off the frozen crust, my stomach tightened. It was a letter. The paper was old, yellowed at the edges, but perfectly preserved, as if the snow had protected it. The ink was dark, untouched by the weather. The handwriting was neat, deliberate. My name was on the envelope. Not my aunt's handwriting, not my parents', but someone had written my name, in ink that hadn't faded despite being buried under snow. I swallowed hard, my fingers stiff from the cold, as I tore it open. There was only one sentence inside. Do not enter the house. A chill that had nothing to do with the weather ran down my spine. I turned toward the front door, the old wooden frame, dark and looming. I had come here to pack up the last of my aunt's things, to finally clear out what was left of her life. But now, standing there, with that letter in my hand, an overwhelming feeling of wrongness settled over me. Someone had left this here for me. Someone had known I would come. The house stood silent, its windows black, reflecting nothing. The wind whistled through the trees, but everything else was too quiet. My breath curled in the air as I forced myself forward, stepping up onto the porch. The wood creaked under my weight. The key turned easily in the lock. The door swung open, revealing the darkness inside. The air was thick, stale, carrying a faint scent of dust and something older, something sour. My footsteps echoed as I stepped in, the floorboards groaning like a warning. The furniture was still covered in white sheets, frozen in time. A clock on the wall had stopped at 2:44 a.m. The second hand forever paused between ticks. The silence pressed against my ears, and then a fluttering sound. I turned sharply. Something drifted down from the staircase above. A single piece of paper, floating, twisting, landing softly on the floor. My throat tightened as I bent down, fingers shaking as I picked it up. Another letter. The ink was fresh. You shouldn't be here. I dropped it. My breath came fast, shallow. My heartbeat thundered against my ribs. There was no one else in the house. I had locked the door behind me. The windows were all shut. And yet, from upstairs, a floorboard creaked. I went cold. The sound was slow, deliberate. A single step, then another. The wood groaned under a weight that wasn't mine. I wasn't alone. I took a step back, my boots scuffing against the wooden floor. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Then, Another letter slid into the room. I didn't see where it came from. It just appeared, slipping across the floor like it had been pushed. My breath caught in my throat as I picked it up, my fingers trembling. "Look in the mirror." My stomach twisted. The only mirror in the house was the tall, antique one in my aunt's bedroom. I didn't want to go upstairs. I didn't want to see what was waiting, but I had to. Each step up the stairs felt heavier, the air colder, the house groaned around me, the walls seeming to tighten, pressing inward. The breathing in my chest felt too loud. My pulse hammered in my ears. At the end of the hallway, the bedroom door stood slightly open. The mirror faced the doorway. At first, I only saw myself, pale, wide-eyed, my breath visible in the freezing air. Then, behind me, a figure, not a shadow, not a trick of the light. Someone stood just behind me, their face obscured, too close, their breath fogging against my skin. My body seized. I spun around. The room was empty, but in the mirror, the figure was still there, watching. The letters on the dresser trembled as if something unseen had just moved past them. The whisper came next. "Get out." I ran. I didn't stop until I was outside, gasping in the freezing wind, my boots sinking into the snow. The house loomed behind me, silent and waiting. And then, just as I turned toward my car, I saw it. More letters. Scattered across the porch, across the snow, across the windshield of my car. I picked up the closest one, my hands shaking so badly I could barely unfold it. One word. Run. I didn't question it. I left that night, tires spinning against the ice, my breath ragged, my heart a drum of terror in my chest. I never went back. I never spoke of it. But sometimes, when the snow is deep, I think about the letter that had been waiting for me, the one buried beneath the ice. And I wonder who wrote it, or worse, what was trying to warn me. Story number 11, The Guest in the Basement. The house wasn't supposed to have a basement. I had been living there for almost a month, house sitting for my uncle while he was out of the country. It was a quiet place, tucked away in the countryside, surrounded by acres of snow-covered land. The house was old, but well-maintained. High ceilings, creaky wooden floors, a fireplace that barely warmed the rooms. The first few nights were uneventful. The wind howled through the trees. The floorboards groaned under my feet, and the house settled in the way old houses do. But then, on the fourth night, I heard something I shouldn't have, a sound from beneath the floor. It wasn't the usual shifting of wood or the muffled echo of the pipes. It was softer, footsteps, slow, deliberate, moving beneath me. I sat up in bed, my heart thudding against my ribs. The sound was distant, barely more than a whisper in the silence, but I knew what I had heard. Someone, or something, was moving underneath the house. The problem? This house didn't have a basement. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I searched. Every corner, every wall, looking for anything I might have missed. The house had no cellar, no trapdoors, no hidden passageways. I told myself I had imagined it, that the isolation was getting to me. And then, the next night, the noises came back. This time, they were closer. I lay frozen in bed as I listened. A slow, shuffling step, then another. They weren't beneath the house anymore. They were beneath me. I shot out of bed, my breath coming fast. The floor was solid beneath my feet, cold against my skin, but the sound continued, right below where I stood. A dragging noise like something pulling itself across the wood from underneath. I turned on every light in the house, pacing from room to room, checking the walls, the vents, anything that could explain it. Nothing. Just empty rooms and the soft hum of the winter wind against the windows, until I found the door. It was in the pantry, behind a shelf that had been bolted to the wall. I only noticed it because the shelf had shifted, leaving just enough of a gap to see the dark sliver of wood beneath. My hands were shaking as I pulled the shelf away, revealing a door I had never seen before. It had no handle, just a keyhole, rusted with age. The footsteps started again, on the other side of the door. I backed away, my pulse hammering. The footsteps stopped, just as suddenly as they had started. I held my breath, waiting for something, anything. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Then, a single knock. I turned and ran. I spent the next day convincing myself that I hadn't actually heard it, that the house was old, that noises were normal. But no matter how many times I told myself that, I couldn't stop thinking about the door. That night I locked myself in my bedroom. The lights were on, the blankets wrapped around me, my back pressed against the headboard. And then, at 3:12 a.m., I heard it, the door opening, a slow, creaking groan from down the hall. My body went rigid. My breath caught in my throat. The footsteps started again, this time inside the house. They were slow, too slow, like someone was waiting between each step. Then the breathing started, software shallow, too close. I clamped a hand over my mouth, willing myself not to make a sound. The footsteps came closer, stopping just outside my door. A pause, a long silence. And then the doorknob turned. I didn't think. I bolted out of bed, grabbing the lamp from my nightstand, heart hammering so hard it drowned out everything else. The door didn't open. It just shuddered, the knob twisting violently back and forth. Then silence. I stood there, frozen, every muscle locked. Minutes passed, then an hour, then 2, and then, just before dawn, a single whisper. Found you. The air turned to ice. I ran. I grabbed my keys, my coat, and sprinted out into the freezing morning, leaving everything behind. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting long shadows over the untouched snow. But as I reached my car, something made me stop. The house stood still behind me, dark and silent, but the front door was open. Not just open, wide open. I hadn't unlocked it. I hadn't touched it. And there, standing in the doorway, was a chair, a single wooden chair, facing out toward me, like someone had been sitting there the whole time, waiting. I drove until I ran out of gas, until the house was nothing but a distant memory in the rearview mirror. I never told my uncle what happened. I never spoke about the door, or the whispers, or the chair. But sometimes, in the dead of winter, when the nights are long, the wind howls through the trees, I dream of that house. And in my dreams, the door is always open. If you made it this far, you're brave enough to face the unknown. But tell me, have you ever experienced something unexplainable? A moment that sent chills down your spine? Share your horror stories in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. More terrifying tales are waiting for you. Watch the videos appearing on your screen now, if you dare.